Good afternoon. We're going to be studying a mimer that the Rebbe said exactly 40 years ago. As we've discussed previously, when something has 40 years, it finally sinks in. That's what Moses told the Jewish people when they were about to enter the Holy Land, that God hasn't given you eyes to see, a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, to get it, until this day. The Talmud discusses that and saying, what do you mean? They've been listening for 40 years. The Talmud comments that it takes 40 years till someone could really get it. Till 40 years you really don't get it. And it's explained further in commentaries that it actually permeates the world in a sense of permanence at 40 years. So that's a special significance, although every mimer of the Rebbe is significant, every discourse is significant, and of course, as we've discussed, it is at least for simple people like most of us, in a clear way, it was the most intense format of spiritual flow and energy that the Rebbe shared with us. Even in front of us, the way he said it, with his eyes closed, with proper preparation, people standing to hear it as the Rebbe said it, as opposed to the rest of the gathering, which was, great treatises in Torah, but it's a different format. And then here the Rebbe spoke to people directly. The Rebbe sent letters, and there's pictures and video and whatever else, and this is all energy and flow that the Rebbe shares and it boosts all of us. But a mimer has a special effect. And it's important that as we learn this, we understand that this is an explanation of Torah concepts based on Chassidus, and the Rebbe giving this to us. But it's also because the Torah is the Torah of life, Torah's Chaim, Hira b'Chaim, Torah of life, which is a lesson in life. So there's something more than just this explanation, but it pertains to our own daily struggles, in our own programs, whatever it may be that we're up to in our own lives. You're guaranteed to gain something from any piece in Torah, and particularly when it was the Rebbe who loved every single Jew, and it's now 40 years, and concerned for the welfare, materially and spiritually, of every member of the world, of humankind. So certainly this gives us special energy at this time. This mimer, as every mimer, there are over 1,500 of them, over 1,550 or so, is potent, of course, but very interesting. And this is a Purim mimer. And Purim 1984, 5744. Mimer begins quoting a passage from the Megillah, very famous passage of the Megillah, which the Talmud tells us that when the reader of the Megillah gets up to this passage, it's the first passage of chapter 6, he has to raise his voice because it's where the main part of the victory of Purim begins. This is where the story takes a turn from the decree to the beginning of the decree being overturned. BaLayla Hahu nodado shenas hamelech. On that very night, in the middle of the Purim story, the sleep of the king was disturbed. It's a reference to Achashverosh couldn't sleep. That's when Haman made the plan, and he couldn't sleep. And the king said, "What's going on here?" It was between the two feasts, and he heard someone came, and it was Haman, and the king had the Chronicles read, and there it said that Mordechai saved the king's life, and he hadn't been rewarded. And the Midrash, the Talmud, tells us a lot about the story. And when Haman, who had just come to get permission to hang Mordechai, the king said, "I got a question for you. What do you do for someone who needs a good reward?" And the Megillah says explicitly that Haman thought in his heart the king is referring to him, and he came up with a nice reward. You get to ride you get to go horseback riding, he said, on the king's horse. And you get to get dressed up too. Dress up. Right? You get to wear the king's clothing. It's interesting if you think about it in today's term. Like, what was he? Was he trying to portray himself as the king? Fantasize that he's really the king? What was up with that anyway? But that's a separate discussion, which is certainly not for now. So, and this is the Rebbe quoting his Rebbe and father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, who brings this in his mimer that he said, and this mimer that he said with these words, he said exactly 84 years ago. The Rebbe explained this subsequently in the talks before he said this mimer, that the first mimer that the previous Rebbe said after he settled in this country, which today is the 9th day of Adar Sheni, and it's precisely the 84th anniversary of the arrival of the previous Rebbe to these blessed shores. And the first mimer that he said was less than a week later on Purim. So what did the Rebbe? This is the first mimer it's not the first mimer in America, but it was the first mimer that he said in America when he settled. He had been in America 10 and a half years earlier, and he did say Memorim then. So it wasn't the first time he said a mimer in America, but it was the first mimer of after he moved, the permanent move till Mashiach comes. So, maybe Chakmo Chadmur b'mamor dibra maschal zed isam hagei maharil de BaLayla Hahu tzrichim lagbi as keilei b'kriyosei lefish zeu ikir hanes. So it says in the customs of the Maharil, which we follow many of these customs, both in the high holidays and other times, that the reader has to raise his voice when he's reading this, because this is the main part, the primary part of the miracle. The BaLayla Hahu who has cholas tokvish al nes, because, like it says in the Talmud, Tractate Megillah, that the main part of the miracle begins, like we just mentioned, at this part of the story when the king couldn't sleep, and all these events started to happen, like is well known, that Purim looks like everything was one big coincidence. It was the miracle that was masked in nature. That's why we wear masks on Purim. So, Umadayik bozed, l'chayrik renes hu bakoshes Esther, v'tachanu neho, kinim karnu anivami. So the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses the fact that one would think the main part of the miracle is at the second feast, which Esther prepared, and Haman was present, and he says, what can I do for you? The first day she says, you know what you could do for me? Come tomorrow to the party. We got another party tomorrow. Another big dinner. Okay, but the second one, she says, I just want my life, because me and my nation, my people, have been sold, right? So that's the miracle. She tells Achashverosh, and then he says, who would want to kill you, my wonderful queen? And she says, this evil, wicked Haman, this enemy. And then if you want to look at the significant parts of the miracle, she prepared for that. She told Mordechai in her preparations, she instructed him, Lech k'neis es kol ha-Yehudim, v'tzum olai, gather all the Jews, fast for me, gimsu perbi geras ha-Purim hazeis, as is written in the Megillah, which is referred to as this letter. The Megillah is referred to as a letter of Purim that tells the story. And like it says that in the end of the Megillah, it says, Divrei hatzomis v'za'akosam. When we recount the story, we also talk about the fasting and their prayers. They're beseeching God for mercy. V'lo ma'omer the ikir v'teikif hanes humash another doshnas hamelech. Why do we say that the main part of the miracle is that the king couldn't sleep, that the king's sleep was disturbed? And then the Maharal says, this is the main part of the Nes, so this is where you have to pick up your voice and say it out loud, very loud, the reader. Well, maybe so the previous Rebbe brings the Medrash that states, BaLayla Hahu nodeh l'shnas hamelech zeh malki shel olam. This is a reference, the Medrash says, and actually it's explained that every time it says the word Hamelech, the king, there's also something which is mirroring in the story of Purim, that it's mirrored within God. So it's also a reference to God. So although God's name isn't mentioned anywhere explicitly in the Megillah, but when it says the king, it's also a reference to the king of all, the king of kings, right? The Melech Malchi Amlochem, the king of all kings, the king which is the king of kings. And specifically in certain places, there it's explained according to Kabbalah and Chassidus what this means. So here the Frierdiker Rebbe brings the Medrash that says that when the sleep of the king was disturbed, that's a reference to the sleep of the king of the world, the king of all kings. The sleep of God, so to speak, was disturbed. Obvious question coming in, right? Incoming. Right? Didn't we say that God neither slumbers nor he sleeps? Okay. That's the obvious question that is, of course, floating in everybody's mind. Let's hope that question will get answered here. If not, we might be out of business. Okay. So, does God sleep? Just when Israel doesn't do up to par, when they're choitim. Some people translate choitim as sinned. But choitim really means they missed, right? If you shot an arrow and you missed your target, that's what choitim means. So colloquially maybe it means sinned, but it really means that we're not doing like we should. So God makes as if he is sleeping. And the flip side of the coin is, here's the good news. And it's saying, when we do his will, he neither slumbers nor does he sleep. The first person that was created by being formed by God's own hands is Adam. And the first two people, they were created as one and separated, etc. And they are both called Adam. The species of humanity is called Adam. And the male of that species his name was also called Adam. His wife was called Chava because she was the mother of all life, of all living people. So Chava has the Chaya in it, as it says in Genesis. But Adam, which is the species of mankind, and his name, why was he called Adam? Because he's Adam el Elyon. He is similar to the supernal. So God created us in his image. So Adam hu Hashem Adam el Elyon v'lachin kol inyanim shelamayla heim be'eisei ha'ifin kvi she'ein ba'adam. So everything that happens above in heaven, supernally with God, is the way it is by man. Atem kruyim Adam. We're all called Adam. And there's a reciprocity here. We are the people here, and God created us in his image, and therefore the way we are created is the way it works with God. And that's the way he made the creation, to resemble, that we resemble him in the way he acts. So, for instance, it says that all of the mitzvahs that God commands us to do, he performs. Each one, the famous one is that Rabbi Mitzvah boy speaks about how does God put on tefillin, the Medrash says. What does it say in his tefillin? Right? We say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And in God's tefillin it says that who is like your nation Israel, one nation, goy echad ba'aretz, one nation on earth. So, the Zohar says, le'elu kegavna dilutato. What happens supernally is like what goes on down here, in the lower realms. Like it says in the verse in Proverbs, kamayim aponim liponim kein leiv ha'adam la'adam. Like the face reflects its image when it's looking into the water, so to speak, when you're a mirror for that matter, but here it's talking about you see one's reflection. So like the reflection of the face in the water, so is the heart of a person, of Adam, to a person. So now just putting this all together. When we are in our own state of slumber, status of slumber, we're not doing like we're supposed to, we're not hitting the mark. So what does that mean? We're not hitting the mark. Matters of Torah and performing a mitzvah, Torah study, these are the things that make us and be similar to the supernal, to God, right? With what are we similar to God? Right? There's the external, and then there's our essence, which is the Torah and the mitzvahs. And if these are in a status of sleep, of slumber, through this, it, so to speak, is as if the king of the world also goes into slumber status. How do they sometimes the computers or different things, sleep. So it's on, but it's a little bit in the slumber mode. Kamesha Kosu, like the verse says in Song of Songs. Ani Yeshena, it says, I am sleeping and my heart is awake. Ani Yeshena V'Esav V'Zeir B'Galusa. The Zohar explains that it's as if in exile there is a certain element of God which is not in a revealed, open way like we were able to see when the temple was standing, and therefore in exile it's as if he's asleep. And that's because of the nation and the people of Israel in the time of exile. So it makes that it's as if there's some slumber supernally too. So now we're starting to see why that the miracle starts when suddenly God's sleep, meaning the sleep that is because of the, if we say that God is slumbering because we're slacking off and we're not hitting the mark, that means when he's getting up, when he can't sleep, it means because that means must be that the mark is being hit down here. So the main part of the miracle is that that status of sleep was disturbed. Even though this was during exile still. But nevertheless, although God was in that slumbering status in exile, but here that slumber was disturbed, that sleep was disturbed. That means that things down here had improved, had been like they should be. There was the complacency left. People were involved, people had prayed. So now suddenly that means that the slumber status was now getting an awakening. This is specifically why the Megillah uses the term nodada. Nodada, although we say disturbed, Nodada means really it was moved slightly. When something moves around, we say that here the Rebbe is going to bring just a word. But, the lashon nodada who kamesha emim al adam shu nodad min koimai. Nodada means that like a person who moved from his place. Now this same first person, the Rebbe doesn't say it here, but it's obvious, and I'm sure it's significant because everything Torah is very significant. Nothing is by chance, everything is connected. When the first person didn't hit his mark, didn't do what he's supposed to do, and then each one of the three that were involved in the first sin, each one got a punishment, right? And the term there is nod and nod. That's actually not even the first. That's already, come to think of it, it's already the son of these people, of Cain. Nod and nod to your body. You won't be able to stay in one place. You're gonna have to move around a lot. But we see this term, nod, of movement, and it comes from the same root, nodada. So the Rebbe says that's why there are many ways to say in the Holy Tongue, in Lashon Kodesh, that a person can't sleep. But here it uses the term nodada shnas hamelech. And the Rebbe is pointing out, the Lashon zeh gufa mechiach shehoye roi sheyeh b'mokim zeh, that aksher b'peil nodad min kaimim. It really should have been like that, because in exile, God has this status. But since something special came up, it moved it away from that status. In other words, the Rebbe says that this is the term when someone moved from their place, meaning that person should have really been in this spot, but it moved. It wasn't there anymore. And the same thing the Rebbe says about the sleep of the king of the world. So it was befitting that he would be still in slumber stage, but it moved. Because in the time of exile, so to speak, it's this slumber stance. The miracle of Purim is, even though it was in the time of exile, and by the way, in the bigger picture, BaLayla Hahu, on that night, Golus is also compared to night, when there's not light, it's not luminous, can't see what's going on. Nevertheless, even though it was that night, the slumber of the king was disturbed, it moved, Malka Shaloilam, the king of the world. And the Rebbe continues to quote, here's the Rebbe, who continues, so, to understand a little bit of what does it mean, the supernal slumber, God sleeps, what does that mean? So to understand it, we have to understand how it is with a human being, people. As it says in the verse, from my flesh, I can see God. In other words, we and elsewhere it says, to know what's supernally, you have to know from yourself. It doesn't only mean know what's above yourself, but to know how it works above, it also comes from yourself. So read those words like that. So the Rebbe says here, what's the difference between a human being who is sleeping and who is awake? It's not the essence of who they are and what they are. They don't change as a human being. Let's take the worst case, heaven forbid, scenario. You would say that something different about a human who's sleeping than if, God forbid, somebody, heaven forbid, murdered someone. They'd say, and who was sleeping, okay, it was a sleeping guy. No, you don't say that. It was a person. No matter what, a person is the same, whether they're asleep or awake. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says you're responsible whether you're asleep or awake. You got to make sure that before you went to sleep, you didn't sleep down, you didn't go to sleep next to the earthenware vessels that you might knock over and bust. Famous passage in Talmud, right? So, the person who's sleeping is still a person. Not only when the person sleeps do they have all their limbs and sinews, they're complete, and everything's alive. It has all the faculties of a soul. They're all intact, they're all there. They're actually even doing what they have to do. And as we actually see regarding dreams, if a person dreams while they're sleeping, so in the dream, they can have experiences with feelings, of anger, of happiness, of pleasure, of grief, of anxiety. They all are working within the person when they're dreaming. Now, actually, subsequently, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that in the Maimer they didn't get into the previous Rebbe didn't get into all aspects of this Maimer, especially about how we are in Golus, etc. So we'll read a little bit more here. But interestingly, a person has those experiences even while they're asleep. Which means that, now you might say dreams are a different part of the consciousness, etc. We will talk a little bit about that. But the point is that it's a sleeping person, and the person is experiencing happiness or sadness, excitement, pleasure, anxiety, and whatever else. It's all while they're asleep. So that means that they have everything intact. Now, taking it up as a few notches. When a person merits this, sometimes when you think about stuff while you dream, it's real intellectual stuff that makes sense. Sometimes dreams are talking about stuff that totally doesn't make sense, and the Talmud says Cholim debate and whatever, there are follies in dreams, etc. But sometimes you could really think of something which is really on the mark. And someone could have pleasure and the fulfillment of their will in the dream. But anyone who's not, thinking of deep intellectual things, certainly, or Torah things, but nevertheless, within their dreams, they have intellectual ideas, and they have their will, and they have their pleasure, and everything that there is. It says in the Talmud that certain things are impossible, and the Rebbe explained this in a couple of days after Purim in his private audience when he spoke about other matters of Torah. He also expanded a little bit on this mimer, and we'll go to that in a minute. In a few moments. Anyway, the Talmud says that although dreams are unrealistic, but it can't be a total impossibility that you're going to dream of. So, for instance, the Talmud says a person wouldn't dream that an elephant went through the eye of a needle, of a small needle, of a regular sewing needle. Because that's not something that has any reality to even dream about. So even though you could dream things that are unrealistic, but they're, at least in a certain realm, they're possible. But something which is totally impossible, that's not dreamable. So, v'hachiluk shebein er liyoshen hu, the be'eshu er kol hinyonov, hem be'efen, mesuder, mikol shkin shein shaykh sheyu shnei hinyonim ha'ofchim, v'asachas v'chiverechad v'afil lebehem shrechad. When someone's awake, they're cognizant, and therefore everything's orderly. And it's not possible to have two opposites in one spot and connected, and not even in one continuance. Everything has to be orderly. Everything is orderly, so therefore you can see the difference between one thing and another thing. And the advantage of one over the other, etc. But when you sleep, you could have unrealistic things because it's not orderly. So things that don't necessarily make sense, just that they're not impossible. And then during one's sleep and dreams, you can have things that really realistically don't connect, but in the dreams they do. From the most supernal, highest faculties to the lowest, and in a way which is really not orderly. And you certainly aren't able to discern the difference between the most refined parts and the most most coarse, let's just say. It's so okay. Now I just want to do the notes. If those are following inside, in the note 18, I believe it's 18. The Rebbe, when he spoke about it here in the Mimer, he says that a person can experience their will being fulfilled and pleasure, which in itself is a lengthy discussion in Chassidus. What is greater? Are they equal? And which one is the cause and which one is the effect? Are they really just two parts of one thing? Because you have pleasure and will. What you want and what gives you pleasure. Since it gives you pleasure, you want it, or because you want it, it gives you pleasure. And then where are these faculties within oneself? And it's really in the whole body. It's explained because it's immediate, and that's where it's felt, and it's something which is higher than intellect. A lot is discussed about the idea of what the will and pleasure is. Now, the Rebbe said subsequently that even though he was quoting and expounding on the mimer of his father-in-law, but his father-in-law doesn't mention these two explicitly. So, and the Rebbe does. So the Rebbe said, because the reason why it's brought in the mimer to speak about the difference between someone who's awake and someone who's asleep is to explain how things are when it's exile, which is the analogous to sleep, when then the advantage of the neshama of Israel is not apparent, because it's as if they're asleep, because it's exile. The supernal type of intellect. So this to illustrate this, that in Golos things are not like they should be, it's enough to say that they have their innermost faculties, but they're asleep. So therefore, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Mimer, says that he's able to have the intellectual basis of his emotions and faculties, but he doesn't discuss pleasure and will and pleasure. Therefore, the Rebbe said, and in order to, the Rebbe says, therefore, in my mimer that I said on Purim, so that one should not be mistaken, it's not to negate that there can't be will and pleasure. That's why I mentioned it. The Rebbe says explicitly. You have this. It's not really the point of what he was trying to explain, but that's what the Rebbe says. I did bring it in the Mimer. And what?
Lucid dreaming.
Yeah, lucid dreaming. And there's a lot to be said. I mean, even in there are a few Torah books, but books based on Torah sources about dreams, and it's a big discussion because Torah seems a little bit contradictory on this in and of itself. I mean, we'll go off on a tangent here for a moment. We'll allow ourselves. We actually have a prayer on the festivals that we pray. That's what we say it on the festivals, because outside of Israel we only have the blessing of the Kohanim on festivals. And in there we pray for the dreams that weren't good to be transformed into good, the blessings. And that if they were not good, they should be healed, etc. And in other places it says dreams are worthless and nothing, and don't worry about it. And elsewhere, if you look very carefully, and actually in the Siddur, there's also a whole prayer which has to be done before a tribunal called Hatovas Chaloim, which means that to make a dream good, the can I make up some words here? The goodening of a dream, right? To make the dreams good, Hatova. So that's if somebody had a bad dream or a nightmare of some sort, they pray, and the tribunal tells them, so whatever you saw, a good dream, and etc. There's all you can look it up in the Siddur later. So dreams have significance. It also says that if somebody studies and they merit, they could they can understand their Torah better. Now scientifically, there are studies that tell us, and people do this now before exams, they pre-record some either texts or things that they have to know, and they play it even while they're sleeping. They hear it in their subconscious. They say this improves your chances at doing better in the test and things like that. There are studies. You can see these all. So this is all an interesting topic, which is really not pertinent to get into at this moment. Now, another note about the will and pleasure. And the Rebbe mentioned the Maimer, and he said it in that talk at that audience. The Talmud says in the end of the tractate Yuma, which is about Yom Kippur, it's also called the Day of Atonement, but it's also like Purim, so it's connected in that sense too. And in the end of it is actually called, the name of that chapter is Yom Kippurim, and the Rebbe says to see the commentary there, that there it's a discussion about something that may happen to the Kohen. We're supposed to be careful on Yom Kippur not to be very pure on Yom Kippur, and that there shouldn't be an eternal emission, and that everyone should be focused on holiness, etc. That's why after the Yom Kippur service, the first 4 chapters of Psalms are said, and it's said with the specific intent. And usually intents are not specified in our Siddur, because that's our Siddur is what's called Shava L'chol Nefesh. It's equal for everybody, so not everyone's up to the intents. But when there's kavanas, but when there is a kavana, then we have to explain why here it's specifically needed, because it's something you have to do. So, for instance, the Haggadah, we have the intent of what you have to think when you're pouring the wine out, with the 10 plagues, a few other places. So here, when we say that, the intent is to have the vowels on God's name would be the same vowels as Bivris, which are with the covenant for this idea. So then the Gemara there has a discussion, and here the Rebbe just referred to it, and you could see that Gemara there, but the bottom line is that there is what did you call it before? The lucid things that are happening sometimes within dreams. Okay. Then there's the idea that you can't see the elephant going through the needle. The Rebbe says here in note number 20, also from that audience, the Rebbe quotes that Maimer like somebody who does dream an elephant in the hole of the needle. So, if the Talmud says that that's not something that you could dream because it's too impossible, so how does the previous Rebbe say that in the dream? Say that in his Maimer? So the Rebbe answers, Zehu davke when you're thinking about this during the day, meaning if you're thinking about that, so then maybe you could try to somehow dream this. And he actually says it's in a dream. And when you dream, you can have two opposites. Even this comes from what you're thinking about during the day, not because of the dream itself. When you're dreaming, you're not cognizant, you're not aware of the fact that what you're dreaming is because you thought about this during the day. It says that something that's going to come up in your dream is because of what you thought about it. You thought about this idea somehow, and then it, of course, builds a whole building but it's just based on something. Okay, let's go back into the minor. So this is the connection between exile and sleep. So now hopefully we won't go off on too many tangents. But as already mentioned, the exile is like slumber time in the heavens, supernally. The whole reason, the whole cause of the Golus, that the advantage of Yisrael is not recognizable. It's not recognized. And that's why Golus happens. Israel are the offspring, the children of the omnipresent, of God. Like it says explicitly in Deuteronomy, you are children to the Lord your God. And certainly, at least, the servants of God. Like is said in the prayer on Rosh Hashanah, treat us like your children or like your servants. Shagam Eved Melech Hu Melech, like it says in the Talmud, that the servant of a king is also a king. It's because he's, he represents the king. Therefore, he's not just like the king, he is the king, because he's bringing the edict of the king. So how could it be then that we're in exile, if we are like that? Children have to be supported at their father's table. So how could this be? And certainly slaves, servants, are supported by their master. And the reason why they were exiled from the table of their father, their master, is the slumber, the sleep. At the time of the exile, we're not able to discern and see the advantage of Yisrael, and this is what Golus comes from. So now we're going to go to part 2. Explained, the Rebbe's Rebbe explains further in the Maimer that when somebody is sleeping, you're not able to discern the more refined and profound capacities over the more simple ones, right? So let's say your thought process and the ability to run. And when you're sleeping, you don't see the advantage of one over the other. So the reason for this is the reason for this is because in your soul there really isn't a big advantage. In other words, your soul is the essence of that you're a person. Now we're going to have to break down the person to have different faculties, different parts, and different ways that it works. So you have the more refined and the more profound and the less profound. But that's already when it breaks out. But in its essence, the foot and the head are both of this important being, which is you and me, everybody. So when it's in its expression, so then it really makes a difference. One is maybe more important than the other, or one is more complex, and one is less complex. So in the essence of the soul, everyone's the same. It's just you're part of the soul. Shashom, in other words, in the etzem hanefesh, Shashom kol hakechesim b'shvo. V'hainu, the inyan yisalmus hakeches sheveis hashina, humash hakeches misalum mistalkum l'shoshim. So that's why when one is asleep, all of the faculties just go up to their root, and at the root, everyone's equal. They're all the same. Etzem hanefesh, the essence of the soul. V'yashleimar. Usually when we learn this, we have a certain individual that says, and you can take this to the bank. If the Rebbe says v'yashleimar, and you can say, you can bank on it. The Masha maybe b'hamaymer in yizeh. This is the Rebbe's. We find this very often in the Rebbe's Mamorim. That the Rebbe will actually also speak about why a certain thing is in a maimer, and why it's in this order, and why this particular thing, that in and of itself is a lesson. So the Masha maybe b'hamaymer in yizeh b'chdei. We should also understand in what is being illustrated in the analogy. The inyan ha'isalmus b'zman hagolus shina humashu hu misal mekeirei. The Rebbe loves this point. The Rebbe says, "Hey, let's take this point to the bank." The whole idea here in the Maimon, he says it was golus, and golus things are lousy because things are asleep, things aren't orderly, things are messed up. And this, the Rebbe says, but why are they messed up? Because they're back up in their root. So that means in Golos, even though things are not up to par and not on the mark, but in a deeper sense, we're at the root. And at the root, we're all the same. And at the root, we're very holy. And at the root, we're connected to God at the deepest level. That's what we are. So the Rebbe says that here. He says, "V'yashleima the masha maybe b'maymin yizeh b'chtei shemizeh yuvan gam b'nimshul dinyin ha'isalmus shebizman hagol shina hu mashu misalum keidei." We're really, in a certain sense, elevated to our source. Uchidu ma'imra zayir al pasuk ki einenu. It speaks about I will seek out at that time the sins, and they won't be there. The kutchabrichu salik le'ela. God, so to speak, moves upwards. And it means also when you seek out, God will seek us out, and we will seek out God, and you won't find him because he's not there. What do you mean he's not there? It's not that he's not there. Heaven forbid. He's much deeper concealed. He went up to the highest place supernally, and it's described as cheder l'fnei cheder, one room within another room. So deep in the palace. Similarly to the sleep of the human being. When we sleep, the faculties are elevated to their root. Etzem hanefesh, the essence of the soul. So that means that this idea that the strengths are hidden at the time during exile, that's only relative to us on this low level. During exile, this godly light is elevated, and it's not illuminating here. Therefore we have exile. But the light itself is there somewhere. It's just not shining here. It's not illuminating here. So the light itself is there. On the contrary, the Rebbe says, it's even stronger. It went up and it's there. Like a person sleeping, so the awareness of being awake goes away. You're sleeping. But regarding the soul itself, the soul actually, as the Medrash says in several places, that when one sleeps, the soul goes up and draws down life. And that's why when we wake up in the morning, we say, thank you, God, for returning the soul, refreshed. The Rebbe explains. The whole chain of the way God gives life to these worlds, to the world, is like this soul, like the faculties of the soul. The Kamesh bekeches the nefesh hascholas mitzias hakechesu kameshim klul benefesh shomim klul mashvah. By the faculties of the soul, they're all equal in their essence. The intellect and walking power, sight, vision, hearing, feelings, everything is all in one big same thing. They're all equal at the root, at the source of the soul. Then they come down and they go into the various limbs in the body. Then they're different. They each take on their unique facet. And then within the revealed faculties, there are different ways. Like they are in an open way when the person is awake, and like when they're not. When the person is not awake, how they are hidden. Sometimes they're in a total faint. They're totally not unconscious. Heaven forbid. So supernally we have also all these levels. Like it says, our sages taught. Just like the soul fills and ambulates and animates the body, so also God fills the world. So the sfiras, the faculties with which God creates, are really how they are included within Himself before creation, higher than creation. In the infinite light of God, they're included there, not yet even separated off into spheres. But they're all there because ultimately they will become a root of the spheres. But there they cannot yet be separated off. They're not divided up. They are all in the essence of God. They will ultimately, when He divides, when He creates, then they will turn into that. But so after they come into the highest realm, the highest world of Atzilus, and Atzilus is such a high world that there everything is still totally at one and in sync with God. Over there he could start the creation process of limiting and dividing the concept that it will be exactly 10 faculties and not 9 and not 11, as it says in Sefer Yetzirah, Kabbalistic book of creation and formation. And then you can recognize the advantage of one sfira over the other, although they're all necessary. But some are more general and some are connected with others in a more distinct way. And certainly when they come into the subsequent worlds after Atzilus, into the worlds that are not in total unison, but the worlds that they feel that they have been created, and they do have their uniqueness. There they really take on their unique identity. And then it comes down to this world. Here we also have the holiest place on earth, the holy temple, which is the holiest place on earth. And from there, light goes out to the whole world. We say to the whole world, the actual Hebrew word olam comes from the term helam, which means hidden and concealed. But godly light imbues the world. It comes forth from the holy temple, which is the soul of the world. Just like the spheres come down from the highest to the lowest realms. That the lowest sphere gets energy from the sphere above it. And then at that point you could see the advantage of Israel. Both the advantage of the fact that we are the children of God and the servants. Servants that are totally trustworthy to their master, to God their master. That's like they are the faculties of a person who is awake. But when it's exile, then the supernal realms, which come down to the highest, to the worlds of Atzilus, the world where everything is one with God, and the subsequent worlds of Bri, Yitzira, and Asiya, they're like the revealed faculties of the person when they're sleeping. They have them, but they're not out. You can't see them. And then you could have things that are opposites, that look like they're connected. And that's exile. Just like the person here on earth, humanity, humans. The idea of what's hidden, what's not there when you sleep, is the fact that their faculties are elevated to their source in the soul. So when you're sleeping, it's just that you're not walking, you're not thinking, your greatest intellectual capacities. But it's all there, the capability is all there. And then therefore things are mixed up, they're not orderly. But the way these things are, in terms of their potential, their capabilities, and that's how they are all included in the soul, they're all there. And not only are they there, but they're all equal, because they're all part of the person who owns them. And then when they're sleeping, it doesn't matter that they're not walking because they're asleep at that moment, but they're all there. So it's not a shortcoming. On the contrary, when the way they are in their essence, then they're complete. More than they are when they're revealed. I'm just thinking here. Elsewhere, Chassidus speaks about the fact that a blind person can have offspring that sees, because they're able to reproduce, even though they couldn't see themselves, but they have the faculty of sight is in their soul. So even though in their expression, in the limb or something, it's not working, but in its essence, it is there. And I think even a blind person, when they sleep, are able to see, like a person who is a regular sighted person, because they're both working with their essence of the faculty at the time of the sleep. It doesn't say that here, and if I'm wrong, the good God will forgive. But I think that that's the way it is. So, על דרך זה גם בעניינים של דין ניסם זמן הגול השינה הוא שהגילויים ניסם קדם ושם המוקר לישראל. So that means also what's being explained, the time of exile, our strength also gets elevated to the source. ושם המוקר לישראל, in Ma'ila Yisrael, mit Sturim, and at the source, with the whole emphasis. The Rebbe uses the term here, shturim, which literally means a storm, but the Rebbe means it's very emphasized, extremely emphasized. Bedugmas keches klulim benefesh and b'shleimus. So they're at their source, we're very great, just like a person's stuff, while they're sleeping. El shezeu l'mayla, but it's now at its source. We say there's shloshlos. And then you can't see it in what's being expressed in the world, in the scale of worlds. So therefore it's exile. So it's not that we don't have it, it's just not expressed. So when then this sleep moves, so to speak, from its spot in the cosmos, in the chain of the worlds, then the advantage of the Yid is revealed with this whole storm, with this whole emphasis. Look at the Rebbe's giving us koiches. Look. We could dip into this strength, this power, and then as we dip into it, then the God's slumber is disturbed too. And that's why we see this connection of things that are opposites in exile. Our advantage is during exile even more than it was when the Holy Temple was standing. Because during Golus, our strengths are at their source within God. We can't see it here openly. But nevertheless, he lays and not only isn't it recognizable the advantage that Israel has, it is seemingly they have to be able then to get a lot of their energy and flow and strength, that which comes to them through the officers, so to speak, of the nations, the way things are, and that's seemingly also you need to get things when we're in exile. We're not in our own land. Even our own land is not. We're still in exile in our own land too, and therefore we see this more openly. And even now, you see the nations of the earth are trying to influence all kinds of ways, both in what they give and what they don't know, their opinion, etc., etc., etc. So we're in exile by these other places, and therefore those places are also getting something from God, but through a different channel, and we have to get from that channel too, because it's Golus, because it's exile. So even though the first thing and its opposite that happens during Golus, it's sleep time, and that's how things are, is that the Yidden, whose faculties are on the highest level, are getting from the Sorei HaUmas these other channels that are not on the highest level. So that's opposite set of opposites number one. The Rebbe says also that exile is compared to the gestation, pregnancy. There's also something in which contains opposites. The Talmud says that there is a candle, in the last tractate of the Talmud, that there's a candle kindled on his head. And there's an angel who teaches the child in utero the whole Torah. The This all happens during the pregnancy, during the gestation process, in the womb of the mother. When they're born, they don't have that anymore. If this is so wonderful that he has as his teacher, as an angel, teaching him Torah, a candle is on his head, nevertheless, the Talmud also tells us that a child in utero, his head is between his knees. It's called, in English we call it fetal position, literally. So the same, in Talmud says the same thing. So the Rebbe explains that so that you don't see the advantage of the head over the feet. And more than that, the head is actually with the feet. It's between his knees. To the extent that how does the fetus eat? He eats what his mother eats. The fetus eats what the mother eats. But he doesn't eat it with his mouth. He or she. Maybe now we could say they. They don't eat it with their mouth. If we're talking about more than one, yeah? Derech hatabur. Rak derech hatabur. It goes in through the navel. And that's where the nourishment comes in. Like the Alter Rebbe expounds on this in his Mamorim in Torah and the other Mamorim of the subsequent Rebbeim who also talk about this. We need who Dini Amunazah Shosh and Nichnusu Nachrim Lehechel Rokrum Ham Urim Zevazeh. Now the Rebbe is going to talk about something very interesting. It says in the Talmud Yuma that when they went into the and the Rebbe talks about this at length other places. When the exile was about to happen. So the Talmud speaks about, we just read in the Torah the portions of Trumat Tzava, Tisa Vayakal Pekudei, of the Mishkan and the best of the Mishkan. And we read of was a phenomenal thing in the Beis HaMikdash was the Ark. The Ark had the Ten Commandments, and in the Ten Commandments there was covered with the Kapoides. The Kapoides had in it a very phenomenal set of what's called Keruvim, and the only way to translate it is Keruvim. And when sometimes they use the word cherubim, cherubs, cherubic, right? And it's a child, baby, and a bird with wings, and a face of a child. And it says in the Talmud that when God is happy, they face each other, and when not, they don't face each other. So it says here, in the Talmud, that when the Gentiles entered the Holy of Holies, they saw these two were making out. They were mixed with each other. They were actually in an embrace. They were embracing. And this would illustrate the greatest love that was happening in the supernal realm. And what was really happening? The toughest thing that happened. The Jews were being banished from Israel. The temple was being destroyed. They ain't moving. So it's not understood. The commentators in the Talmud over there asked the question already. Marsha, but I kruv mu'urim zeh v'zeh moire al goydel achiva da Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael kichivas Yisrael Yisrael. The embrace of the kruvim with each other illustrate the greatness of the love, the fondness that the Holy One, blessed be He, has with Israel, like the love of man and woman. We would think that this is the time where it was on the down and out, this relationship. The opposite of love. Explicitly at this time, when the Rebbe speaks about this, Purim is a very special time. The Rebbe then gets into this idea in the Maimer. Things may be very tough in your life, but it doesn't mean that there's not love. So the Rebbe says, at the time that the Gentiles went into the holiest chamber, the Holy of Holies, there was this greatest revelation. Oil shalamaylam yishtalshlus, a luminous, a light which is higher than all of the light that God gave in all the chain of the worlds and every level. And here, this was this great revelation that was able to be seen in a physical sense on the Holy of Holies, in the holiest vessel, which contained the 10 Commandments and the Torah in the holiest place on earth. Because of this, the only thing is that this light was at its source. It wasn't illuminating down here. Now, in that spot on earth, no one else could see it. Talmud describes a few evil people saw it. So you might have a good question: why did they merit to see it? I don't have the answer, but it was seen. We know about it. But the rest of the revelation on earth, it looked very lousy. It didn't look like an embrace of God. On the contrary, it looked like we were being banished. So, the Yesh Lahesiv was a Pima Menazal, the Rebbe says, whatever you read, according to what our sages teach us, Chai Vodin Litkin Sishli B'Shu Yetzel Derech, the Mekivish B'Zman HaGolus, Knesses Yisrael, Hika Almona, Shaholach Bailin Dinas Ayam. Lochin Ifnei Yitziyos Shalabal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Derech, Oz Hoy Apkida. Lochin HaKruvim, so there's a law, and it's actually a law in Shulchan Aruch, and it's also in the Gemara, based on the Gemara, that before, if the husband has to leave town on business or whatever it is, then they should have relations before, because he's going to be gone for an amount of time, and that's the halacha. So at this time, it was God, so to speak, leaving, right? He was going on his way. He was taking a trip. So therefore, there had to be the relations, and therefore the keruvim were in an embrace, like it says, and like the connection of the couple. And therefore we can understand even more so why is the exile compared to the gestation and the redemption, the geula, to the birth. When there are relations, then there could be the formation of a child, conception and formation. But first the child is in utero, in the mother's womb, the helam, in a hidden way, in a way that their head is between their knees. The whole gestation, they keep on growing and growing, till the time of the birth. Then he comes out into the air of the world. He's born. From this embrace, that was the moment before the exile started. That's when the light started to come down. Even here, Elisham, Shachosayu Behelam, but it's hidden. You can't see it. From the Golos, Ibor, in the way of the gestation, the way of the exile. But it's there. And throughout the time of exile, it gets greater and greater from day to day, until speedily and immediately we will have the birth, which will be in the revelation of the Geula in the future to come. And now the Rebbe continues. BaLayla Hahu. What disturbed the sleep, the slumber of God that night? It was the service of the Jewish people to God that whole year. And it was their self-sacrifice of their service. And to understand what that is and how that caused, it's known that we also studied this in the past couple of weeks, this idea of self-sacrifice. The self-sacrifice comes from the essence of the soul, which is higher than all the faculties of the soul. That deepest part of our neshama, the part called Yechida. But for that to really be revealed is when it goes into play, when it affects the other faculties of the soul, and it actually brings about action, a deed. That a person loves and serves God with all their heart and all their soul. That every part of serving God is also with self-sacrifice. Higher than any limitation. That's right. Every single member of Israel, from young to old, children, women, adult. What does that mean? Take out the yellow markers and highlight this. Remember we said every mimer that ever says, but this is about every person. Every person gets the strength from the lesson and from what the Rebbe shares with us. Nar, Zokim, Tafin, Noshim, men, women, children, old, young. They were permeated with movement of self-sacrifice. Everything that they did. Take this to the bank. This is the Rebbe says. You could say that this is why his Rebbe says in the Maimer, the previous Rebbe says, they had self-sacrifice the whole year. The Meshach Hashana Yeshlam Kol Shinui Hatkufes. During the year, there's all kinds of things. A year is called Shana in Hebrew because of the word Shinui. There's differences. The year comes up with all kinds of things and all kinds of moods and all kinds of feelings, and symbolized by the holidays of the year and whatever it is, in all aspects, in all seasons, different weather, different everything. They had self-sacrifice. Like this is illustrated in several of the discourses about the advantage of the esrog. The esrog is able to live in all the seasons. And it's the only fruit that could live several years and not fall off. Every other fruit falls off the tree, but the esrog not only lives in the season, but it thrives from all the seasons. The esrog bechinas malchus, the whole idea of esrog is a royal fruit. In Yonah Shel Esther, it's the idea of Esther. Shadar be'lonam l'shana l'shana. It lives in its tree from year to year. That's why it's also called Hador. Hador means beautiful. Hador, that it lives. It's the same letters in Hebrew. And Esther is also the idea of pretty Hadar. And every season has its own special service. And every season, whether it's 4 seasons, 6 seasons, every day has its difference, its uniqueness. Every single day has its unique process of that day that has to be done. And within all of this, they had Mesiras Nefesh. And when the Friedrich Rebbe emphasizes that they had the self-sacrifice the whole year, he means to say, your particular format of service each and every day was with self-sacrifice, higher than any limitation. And this is how we understand then why through their Mesiris Nefesh they brought about the disturbing the slumber of the king of the world. The Hinin is BaLayla, like the Rebbe says, we just explained. That when the slumber, the supernal slumber, means that the revelations are elevated to their source, so they're not here. And that's what it means that this now that slumber, meaning the fact that they were elevated, is disturbed. That means that some of these revelations come back down here. And that's why this disturbing of the slumber came about through the self-sacrifice of what they did the whole year. What is self-sacrifice? That you don't care about all the influences that you have, what your mind tells you to do, and what everything else tells you, because you look at the real source and what you really need to do, what's really important, your focus. And you elevate everything to the source within the soul. Therefore, with self-sacrifice, you get to the level of the source. That's where all of these faculties go, like we said, during sleep. But since when one is with Mesiris Nefesh, self-sacrifice, then you actually can see and feel, it's palpable, this part of the soul. Therefore, through the self-sacrifice, we can disturb that supernal sleep.
I don't know what happened. We got kicked off of the network, and it's not even showing me any networks now. And the sound went down. So I want to see where we got up to.
So continuing here, Shamoker here, Begilui, the source illuminates in a revealed way. The self-sacrifice was shining in everything that they did. And that affected what they did every single day of the year. They were able to bring about the flow of energy, which is higher than the usual from the regular chain and scale of the worlds. The Nodad Shnas HaMelech disturbed that sleep, in the most innermost way. So to that, in the story of Esther, the king said.
Oh, sorry. It's not gonna.
Again, I'm sorry. So the king said, bring the book of Chronicles that say what happened through history. What does that mean in the big story of God? That the light, which is higher than the chain of the worlds, comes forth in the book of Chronicles that records the history, the root of time. Like the Rebbe says, that means everything of God's creation. And like it says there in the story, that they found that over there it was written, right, that Mordechai saved the king's life. In the book of Chronicles of the actual capital Shushan, during the time of Golos, the Golu, Le'elon, Shushan, Shchina Imon. The Shechina was with them wherever they went, including all the places, Elam, which is a reference to Shushan. And so this time that God's slumber was disturbed, then he made a revelation. The revelation went out into a miracle. The miracle was that they had to read exactly that page. And interestingly enough, the Talmud speaks about the fact that the angels would come. This one was trying to turn the page, and the angel turned back the page to that page, and they should read that part that is praiseworthy of Mordechai. The Rebbe doesn't mention that explicitly here in the Maimer. Just like it wasn't that Golos of Elam during the Purim story. So it is in every exile. Anywhere that Israel was exiled to, the Shekhinahs with them. They were exiled to Edom, The Shekhinah is with them, Sheidei, Yisrael, aim to Mesiris Nefesh to that which we stand. Israel stands with self-sacrifice, She'enim Misbaishim. They're not embarrassed, mispolim, they're not affected from anybody who may even scoff at them and laugh at them. This is connected also with the movement of self-sacrifice. And this idea of self-sacrifice he has in everything that he does. In his particular, in every part of his life, and especially in Torah mitzvahs, and the whole day. This whole idea, this is also the Shulchan Aruch says, don't be affected by those that scoff and make fun of you. It's the right, actually, at the very beginning of the Code of Jewish Law of the Shulchan Aruch. And this idea of self-sacrifice brings him to increase in Torah study and to do the fulfillment of mitzvahs in a better fashion. It's in a way without any limitation. This increase, because it comes with self-sacrifice, because of the self-sacrifice. To the extent that you can recognize when you study Torah, you do mitzvahs, that it's happening with self-sacrifice. Most certainly with love and fear of God. When you study Torah, you remember the giver of the Torah, and his fulfillment of mitzvahs is permeated with the feeling of the commander of the commandments, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us, connected to us, like it says. Like it's explained at length by the Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, the middle Rebbe. By all the mitzvahs, you have to have this general idea that it's God who commanded it. It's equal by every mitzvah. It doesn't matter what you're doing, because you have to realize that it's the God who you're serving here. So whether it's something which you think is small or something that's bigger, you're keeping the commandment of the King of the world. So with self-sacrifice. So through serving God with self-sacrifice, and the self-sacrifice affects the details of the Torah mitzvahs. This will disturb the sleep of the king. It will bring down from higher than the creation into the book of Chronicles, the root of all time. Will be like they'll be read before the king. Even in front of the Achashverosh in this world, because the Talmud says that we're still slaves of Achashverosh, and this is also represented by all the Achashveroshes, the subsequent ones. When we're in Golus and we have to abide by the law of the land of Mordechai, Mordechai is only secondary to the king. But nevertheless, we have the fulfillment of the prophecy that kings will be those that are your that nurse you, that help you in everything that you do. And they can decree on those that were oppositional to the Jews, the Yahadus into Judaism. They should now help and assist Jews in Judaism. Transformation of darkness to light and bitterness to sweetness. Like it was in the days of Mordechai and Esther. Just like in the story of Purim. King Achashverosh decreed that the one who opposed, meaning Haman, should go and announce before Mordechai the Jew, so should be done to the man which the king wants to honor and give him a regal reward. Both the king of the world and the king Achashverosh. To the extent that now to the Jews there was light and happiness and joy, and special endearment. Came to Yalona, so it should be for us, like we say in the Havdalah when we say this verse. The Rebbe doesn't say that, but I'm just adding it. Oir is a Torah, and that's of course like the Talmud says. The light is Torah, but Torah gufa oir lashon nekeva dekoy al Torah shabal peh Torah b'pirusha. And the word oira, we don't say oir, we say oira in the feminine. And in Torah, that's the idea of the oral tradition. The Torah with its explanation, shemimena yitzis oir l'chol elam kulei, like the feminine, which gives off the which has the offspring and gives out the light to the whole world. The Simcha zu Yom Tov, Simcha is a reference to the holidays with Sasan zu Mila, and Sasan is the Mila. The circumcision, Bikar, Elok Tefillin, Bikar is Tefillin, the mitzvah. The Hukshakol Torah Tefillin. The whole Torah is compared to Tefillin. Keil Gam Tefillin, the Moreh Alm, the Chesibu, Mikam, Chisol, Yechavaris, like we mentioned earlier. The Rebbe says it here now explicitly. That the Tefillin of the Master of the world, which says who is like your people Israel, one nation in the land. We're able to see in a revealed way the advantage of Israel. That means the slumber of the king is disturbed. Now that Rebbe finishes off the Maimer and Misra Geulah, and we have the proximity of redemption to redemption. From this redemption of when the Jews had light and happiness and joy and the endearment. Even like when we're still in the waning final moments of the exile. Then will come immediately into the truthful redemption. That these that kings that are your those that serve you and bring you up will bring the Bnei Yisrael, like they will also bring a gift offering, like it says in Isaiah 67, in a pure vessel, El Eretz HaKodesh, to the Holy Land, Eretz HaShatom Medina Vayalekecha Bo B'nei Shoshana V'Dachri Shana, the land which the eyes of God are continuously upon it from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. Over there, and specifically in Jerusalem, which is the seat of the great, and the city, the town of the great king. Shall David Malcolm Mashiach, King David, who will be the King Mashiach. And over there on the Holy Mount, and the Mikdash of God, which is formed with your hands, with the hands of God. It is happening speedily. It is with a haste, which is higher than any limitation, like in Purim, that you can't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. We dance in with a great happiness, which is higher than any limitation in the Gula Mitzvah Shleima Merim Mamish, in the truthful redemption through with a great happiness, higher than any limitation of any happiness, within the truthful redemption, which will happen speedily nowadays, actually so. All the Jews of all the generations, and at their head, the prince of our generation, the Rebbe's Rebbe, Mordechai, Yehudi, Esther, Malka, and Mordechai, the Jew, and Esther, the queen, Kulam Yigalu Mehagolos, they will all be redeemed from the exile. Shleimus HaGeula, with a complete redemption. B'yachadim Shleimus HaAm, with the complete nation. Or Shleimus HaTorah, the complete Torah. Shleimus HaOretz, and the whole Eretz Yisrael complete. And like it says, the fulfillment of the prophecy that God will broaden your borders. Gam Eretz Keni Knizi V'Kadmeni, like we mentioned in last week's Maimer, and also the land of Keni Knizi and Kamoini, that also corresponds to the intellectual part. And it'll happen like no. Every verse you learn it in its simplest form of understanding. But on the contrary, this world is the main world by Yesod, the foundation the whole frame of everything godly is all standing on this world. And we just read this in Tanya, that the world, the main thing was the world was our world. And like we know when it says God is standing above it, it's like this is the whole purpose of God being throughout all those levels in order to make this world where He's hidden. But we reveal Him through our mitzvahs. And actually, there immediately, speedily will be the truthful redemption for all of Israel, from all the generations, the shamas begufim, souls in their bodies. It's of course a reference to the resurrection. Mashiach, our righteous Mashiach, speedily nowadays, actually so. Amen.